that all countries, irrespective of development status, were able to report and utilize their emissions outputs. Indeed, whilst we also had some failures, primarily goal 3, the mobilization of finance, as developing nations were unsuccessful in receiving the $100 billion climate fund as promised in our previous COPs. There were some in-between successes, notably goal number 1, in which, as global collectives, we recognise the severity and detriment of climate impacts above 1.5 degrees, as well as finally the overall abatement of coal and the phasing down, with over 23 countries agreeing to reduce and phase down coal investments. Similarly, there was also the establishment of the UNFCCC Adaptation Fund, with over $230 million committed prior to COP26, as well as the generation of the Glasgow Climate Pact, which acknowledged the issues surrounding loss and damage and the need to urgently scale up and mitigate the extent of further anthropogenic-induced climate impacts. I want to now briefly pass back on to our committee here, so we can begin our discussions.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh, for that overview of COP26. My name is Adama Okagu, and I'm delighted to introduce Joshua Cooper. Mr. Joshua Cooper is an academic, advocate, author, analyst based in Hawaii. Cooper has held several positions ranging from Senior Global Advocacy Manager, Senior Director of Communications and Community Engagement, just to mention a few, with NGOs and human rights defenders associations. Cooper has also been very active in the development of climate change advocacy and advises major groups and stakeholders in the UN Voluntary National Reviews for High-Level Political Forum. Welcome, Joshua. The floor is yours.
Aloha, thank you so much. It's a little early here in Hawaii, but it's an honor to be joining all of you. We've been organizing here in Hawaii in a variety of ways. First and foremost, it's really in the philosophy of the statement of Makahane Ka'ike. Makahane Ka'ike is Olelo Hawaii, or Hawaiian language for in the action. That is where the knowledge is. So one of the things that we have done since COP is actually what we call planting canoes. That is planting koa trees that then one day will be the waka, or the canoes that the Kanaka Maoli, or the indigenous Hawaiian people, have been able to circumnavigate around the entire world using only ancestral wisdom and knowledge. And just last week, that's why my voice is also a little, a little bit of a Glasgow morning with a lot of rain for 2 hours. And we planted, which is perfect weather for planting, we planted over 100 koa trees, as well as mamake trees, which are the ones that are really good for health. It's a tea. So we really believe that the only way to protect our planet, our Mother Earth, as Antonio Guterres said, is by taking action. And with that action, that is where the knowledge really flourishes. So that is one area that we have been active in. The other, though, has actually been with education and starting with youth. And we were able to create a new program, and it was actually built on our great experience preparing for Glasgow. And people had stated and done is that we created a program called Good to Go to Glasgow. And we taught everything about the UN, upcoming UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of Parties that was coming up, to elementary and high school teachers in Hawaii, so that they could transform their curriculum so that students would know what's going on. One of those was the Message in the Bottle campaign that was organized in Scotland. And then the students in Hawaii were able to connect island to island with Scotland to take action. But more importantly, all the way from August through the actual summit. And I'll never forget being there in Glasgow on my first night, but connecting with all the students in Hawaii and sharing with them what was going on at the actual COP and explaining to them how they could even put more pressure on our elected officials to do the right thing in those negotiations, especially the final 48 hours. And now we've started a new program. We're calling it the E4. So Good to Go to Glasgow was a great name for last year, but already we're preparing for August and September to educate, energize, and engage in Egypt COP27, our E4 campaign. And we have teachers from elementary to high school already registering for this program. And we don't only participate in the COP, the Sustainable Development Goals are also very important. We feel the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement both really mesh well and build our movement together across the Atlantic and the Pacific and all the oceans of the world. And we became the first state to do a voluntary local review, bringing together all of our islands, because our government has not done a national one. It was a great way for us to lead by example. And we are now preparing our second VLR, where we're doing our VLRs every 2 years. And our first one was right when the pandemic began. And it's exciting as we're emerging from the pandemic to be able to have another voluntary local review for the second time, to see all that we're able to do while focusing inward here in Hawaii during the COVID. One other exciting aspect of what we have been able to do is we've also been able to become connected with the UN in 2 ways in the field of education. First, United Nations University Regional Centers of Expertise, UNURCEs. Hawaii became one of 5 new UNURCEs this year, and we're having our first activities today. We're having our 5th annual Earth Day at the Hawaii State Legislature. We're also having our event at our new CIFO Center. And CIFO is another wonderful acronym. The UN has many, but it's a French acronym for Centre International Training pour l'Autorité Locale. That's training local authorities. And so we're the only one in the Pacific. So we'll be assisting Pacific Island states preparing for their voluntary national review. And we're having our first event at our CIFO Center at Chaminade University, beginning in just 3 hours from now with the premiere of the film Generation Revolution. So it's exciting to hear Josh. It's great to have 2 Joshes to kick off a panel. I don't think I've ever had that. And thank you so much. Apologies for it being a little dark, but the sun will shine bright very soon in Hawaii. And it's an honor to participate with all of you. And we look forward to continued coordination going to Egypt in the next 6 months. Mahalo, aloha.
Mahalo and aloha, Josh. Thank you so much. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Rebecca Kowalski, founder of Overstory Finance. Rebecca has worked in the financial advice industry for over 25 years in various roles. She felt she could fulfill most of her functions with one eye closed and her hands tied behind her back until she got involved with sustainable finance a few years ago, became really engaged with the potential and the challenges of this area of finance. Rebecca set up a consultancy last year with the aim of encouraging other financial advice firms to embrace sustainable investing as much as she has. Rebecca, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Rachel. So where do I start talking about sustainable finance in 5 minutes? I'm going to actually start with something I heard this morning, coincidentally, from another financial advisor that I thought was a really powerful message. This financial advisor specializes in dealing with older people, people that we class as later life people in financial services, people who are, you know, maybe in the last few years of their lives, they might be in care homes. They've probably earned all the money that they're going to have and are thinking what to do about it when they're no longer here. And that advisor said to me that he is really passionate about sustainable investing. And I said, well, that's interesting. It's normally, everybody thinks it's the younger people who are going to come along and want to invest in environmentally friendly things and climate friendly things. And he said, but the reason why I do it with older people is because this generation is probably the last generation that's actually going to make it to later life. And I thought, well, that's actually really telling. You know, this could be, you know, the current old people are maybe going to see a lifespan that future generations, you know, are scared that they aren't going to see. So also the money that they have accumulated has been accumulated in the current system that we live in, that has made use of all the resources and not had, you know, the problems that we face, you know, whereby we can't continue as we're continuing now. So, you know, they've made their money in the current system, you know, using the resources, and obviously other people are not going to be able to do that in the same way, and the planet is going to be able to survive. There has to be significant change. So I thought that was really interesting. I think we're kind of at a bit of a crossroads in financial services at the moment. I'm actually very pleased a lot of the time at some of the developments that are being made. You know, you have days when you read about new innovations, new initiatives, and you think, yeah, the industry is really understanding the message. It is really doing its best to help people to invest their money in a positive way. And then every now and then you get a complete setback. So I feel like it's kind of 50-50, and it's down to the general public and the investors to engage with the industry as much as possible and influence and say, you know, we actually want our money to be invested sustainably. We want it not to be doing harm to the planet and to be helping to build a brighter future. And that's as important to us, perhaps even more important to us than you making us the most return and the greatest amount of growth that you possibly can. Our industry has historically had a duty and a responsibility to look after people's money for them, to help them retire, to help them bring up their children, all the other things that you want money for. And it is quite a sea change for us to start thinking, you know, that's not why I'm here. My client doesn't want me to come back in a year's time and say, you've made 25% growth and that's more than this person, and haven't I done well for helping you with that? Maybe they want us to tell them something else, and they want to know if their portfolio has a higher than average carbon footprint and things like that. And unless we communicate as individuals to the industry that that's what we want, then they won't change. It's, you know, it's like anybody who wants to build a business, to get to win customers. They are going to offer what they think the customer needs, and until we communicate better that we want something different, then it's hard to expect the change. Going back to the COP26 theme, how has finance got on since COP26? I think it was point 4 on Josh's slide there about the net zero asset managers agreement, and you know, all these people with lots and lots of money coming together to say that they are going to start transitioning towards you know, a greener economy. I read a statistic today, it came out from Reclaim Finance organization, that of those companies in that alliance, 30 of them are funding 468 billion pounds of new oil and gas exploration, and are not campaigning or engaging in any way with those companies to ask them to transition and make a change. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Equally, there is about the same amount of money invested in very green, climate-friendly investments last year. So you can kind of see that we're at a 50-50 stage where a lot of the money is going to really positive things, but that doesn't make any difference if the other half is going to something that's going to just create problems too. So I guess there are lots of ways that the financial services industry can make a difference, and we just need to keep up the pressure that it does that. The ways in which companies can engage with businesses to make a difference. If you have a pension, a bank account, a savings plan of any kind, then underneath that somewhere is going to lie investments in companies, whether that's owning their shares or lending money to all the kind of major industries and companies that we're aware of around the world. And the finance, the big asset owners, the pension schemes, the investment companies, they put all our money into one big pot, and then they use that to give them a really big seat at the table. And they can use that seat in different ways. One of the things that people do as owners of shares is they engage with the companies that they invest in. Engagement has become a really big subject in financial services now. So if you invest with a company and they, for example, they own shares in Shell or Barclays Bank or whoever it might be, they can go to that company's annual general meeting and they can vote on certain issues, whether that's net zero targets, different policies, gender diversity, all these different issues that can tie in with the UN SDGs. Not only will they vote at the meeting, but they will have ongoing dialogue with the companies about these issues. You know, it can be a phone call, it can be an email, it can be a big policy paper they send to a company, and all of these activities they will use as a justification for them using your money and taking charge of your money and applying that in a certain way. So that is potentially a really big lever of ways of driving change, but we have to be sure that they are using that lever as kind of effectively and authentically as they can. A lot of investment companies produce huge brochures about their engagement activities, pages and pages of dense text and glossy pictures and all the rest of it. But what I feel we need to see is kind of real positive outcomes and results that are coming from this activity, that they're engaging with companies, you know, and not just kind of going for a coffee and saying, we think it would be good if you did a bit more of this, but they are kind of laying out absolute targets, what they want to see, how they want to see it, when they want to see it by, and what the consequence will be if that doesn't happen. And that's where we really see the power of finance having a really big effect. The IIGC has just brought out a net zero stewardship toolkit, stewardship being another word really for engagement activities. And that is specifying to the large investment companies that there are specific ways in which they should go about engaging with companies and looking for specific targets and checking that they are actually, you know, walking the walk and not just talking about these things. One of the big arguments when you're thinking about sustainable investing is there something that you want to change, some kind of positive influence you want to have? Should you avoid investing in something, divest from a company, or should you invest in it and try and change it from within? And at the moment, the argument is swinging very much towards hold that investment, own that company, and try and change it from within. But you can only really use that as a reason to invest, as a reason to apply your finance in that way, if you make sure that it absolutely is having an impact, because otherwise it's just a kind of empty marketing tool, you know. What I would do is I would encourage everybody to try and engage with the finance industry as much as possible. I know some people might think it's, you know, I'm not rich, it's not for me, they're not, you know, but everybody has a bank account or a small company pension that their employer pays into or something, or perhaps will inherit some money from their parents in the future, or whatever your situation, you can influence somebody who is investing in some way. Financial services is horrendously complicated, even for people who work within it. So don't kind of feel that you kind of just have to listen to what somebody else tells you because you don't understand it. Try and empower yourself, whether it's by research, whether it's by joining some kind of investor group to build up your knowledge. And if you do happen to engage a financial advisor or work with somebody from within the industry, be very clear about what you're looking for and what's important to you, and shop around. You know, don't just kind of go for the first person, but try and find somebody that shares the same values as you do. And yeah, just kind of be authentic and communicate that message that you're a person who doesn't just care about growth at all costs, but you care about what you can achieve with your money in other ways as well. The products are out there now, the industry has developed them, and it's just kind of making sure that a larger proportion of the investing public actually go down that route and not down funding fossil fuels and the other things that we really don't want to see happening if we want to you know, keep the temperature where we need it to be. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Great, thank you so much, Rebecca. I think what we'll do is we'll do a sort of entire Q&A after all the speakers, but that was fascinating, and thank you so much. I'll now move on to the next speaker, Melinda Kimball. Melinda is a senior fellow with the United Nations Foundation advising on climate change, gender and public health. Before that, she held various positions such as senior vice president advising UN agencies, including the WHO, UNESCO, UNEP and UNICEF, and producing programs in topics like children and women's health, natural resource management and environmental policy. Melinda is also an adjunct professor at Syracuse Maxwell School and a former career Foreign Service officer, retiring from state in 2000. So without further ado, Melinda, thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass over to you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Melinda, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes, good. Okay, I'd like to say, you know, Glasgow, I thought it was very well set out at the beginning by Josh. Glasgow was an important step, but it's important to think about the impact of the period 2020 to finally the Glasgow meeting in 2021. And what we saw at Glasgow was the result of not having ongoing active person-to-person negotiations in a run-up to a COP. And I think in that respect, the people at Glasgow found themselves trying to catch up at the end. But there were some very important things that came out of Glasgow, not just within the decision itself, but also on the sidelines. And one of those was all the work on methane and the Global Methane Pledge, which has the potential to contribute right now in the current 5-year period to actually sharply reducing emissions if those pledges are met. And that's a major challenge. There's also work going on which will be further activated in June at the subsidiary body meetings when people get together for an oceans and climate dialogue. We really need to pay much more attention, not just to emissions, but what's happening to the oceans and what are the actions we may take to reduce ocean acidification, to stabilize coral reefs, to improve coastal zone management. All these are a piece of climate action, and we are not talking about that enough. Although I do know our ocean conference in Palau brought a number of countries together to refocus our thinking about the ocean, and we will have another moment in June at the Lisbon Ocean Conference that the United Nations Oceans Group, including UNESCO, is putting together. It's important to understand that climate actions have to be holistic in nature. Finance is an important part, energy is an important part, but we need to start thinking about how we build, how we use resources, as Rebecca underscored, how we invest. And we need to better understand the diverse impacts of climate change on communities. What's incredibly important this year is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has brought out two pieces of the Big Six Assessment Report. One, as Rachel mentioned in February, which says red alert for the planet. But also this month, they brought out another piece of the IPCC report that for the first time looks at communities and regions that illustrates how climate change is accelerating in many areas we have not paid attention to. And what is happening particularly to Indigenous people and biological diversity, which is another major environmental challenge that we're going to be working on addressing over the summer when China convenes the Conference of Parties on Biological Diversity, and we try to set up an action plan from now till 2030. Climate and biodiversity interact. Forests, oceans, marine life, terrestrial life can all contribute to either good climate outcomes or negative ones. We need more research, more thinking about how we raise food, how we transport food, how we prevent food waste. All these issues are critical to positive climate outcomes. Everything we do, consume, use, or invest in can have a climate impact. We need to be more sensitive to this. And that's why I'd like to underscore first SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production. The Plastics Convention, the Secretary General mentioned, is just one element in that effort to manage our waste products and our pollution on the planet. Recently, WHO said again that air pollution is accounting for as many as 11 million preventable deaths annually. That's a country. Some countries are not that populous. How do we prevent those deaths? What people fail to understand is cleaning up our air with a range of technologies can make a major contribution to climate change mitigation. And we need to pay more attention to that. I was really impressed by the contribution from Hawaii, because that talks about how local communities, youth, Indigenous people can start to work on all these issues holistically. Since Paris, the climate meetings have very much evolved into a participation of stakeholders. States definitely have to do more. That's absolutely true. And the war in Ukraine has shown how difficult it is to eliminate fossil energy from our overall economic mix. So we have to do more at the national government level, and Glasgow committed to encouraging more countries to come up with very constructive net zero pledges at Sharm el-Sheikh. We hope they do that. But every single community has to do more. We have to drive less, waste less, pollute less. We have to redesign our economy around planetary boundaries. And the way you do that is put new emphasis on recycling, reuse, repurpose everything that comes into our lives. These are major challenges, and it's such a privilege to be with you all on Earth Day, because I can see the youth of the future is ready to take on these challenges. So I look for a great discussion. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Melinda. And you gave a great segue right into Georgia Satie's presentation. Georgia is a master's student in climate justice. She's chair of the Glasgow branch of UNA Scotland, and also part of the climate and gender team at UN House Scotland. Her passion and research area is climate change and gender inequality. And she is more recently looking at climate change and gender-based violence in Somalia and South Sudan. So welcome, Georgia.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So with COP26 happening in Glasgow, where I am currently based, and having the chance to take part in a few of the marches alongside colleagues and organizations and groups of international people in general, what has become clear to me as an individual is that while international processes embodied by the annual COP are important, what's also important is the role of other governance levels of the public sector and of civil society. By continuing to face up to internal contradictions and taking whatever action we can at whatever level we can continue to change the context such that at future COPs, leaders will find it increasingly impossible to resist any change. So with that in mind, I would just like to talk a little bit about these two roles that I have. So one of the projects of the climate and gender team is our podcast series called Connecting Women's Voices on Climate Justice, Perspectives from Scotland and Around the World. So through this podcast, our aim is to outline the current struggles of local communities and build solidarity and awareness of women's rights within climate justice. We bring together community leaders resisting environmental destruction and promoting collective change. With these discussions, we hope to inform environmental and social policy and widen engagement in the themes of gender and climate justice. Notably, a few of our podcast episodes that happened right before COP or after COP were on youth voices in climate action, the role of art and activism, and the latest episode which I hosted was a discussion into the connection between climate change and gender-based violence. So apart from our podcast series, the team was also very honored to organize and host a side event for CSW 66, which is the Commission on the Status of Women. that took place actually just a month ago. We had the incredible opportunity to host our event on the ways we live on the land and foreground youth and women's voices in a cross-cultural and multi-generational conversation with some incredible speakers and professionals who, during a panel discussion and our conversation groups that we had on agricultural and farming, art and activism, and water and gender, made some really good points, including re-establishing agricultural food production systems and the revival of indigenous knowledge, how there are lots of groups that need to be brought in and be heard and listened to basically about their needs for water. Why do we need art in our daily life or in the fight for a more sustainable future, and much more. So a little follow-up for the CSW event will be a report which we are hoping to publish, and we'll touch upon all the things that we discussed during our event. So following the events at COP26, which happened in Glasgow, I had the honor of taking part in the revitalization of the Glasgow branch of the United Nations Association here in Scotland, and now I'm serving as one of the chairs of the branch. So as a newly formed team, we discussed and brought ideas and thoughts to the table, as they say, as to what do we do now as a new team after COP26 in Glasgow. Glasgow, for those of you who don't know, is a city to thousands of people who have sought sanctuary here. So as a branch, as youth, and as people who come from different backgrounds, feel that it is extremely important to ensure that migrant and refugee voices are heard, especially migrants, refugees, and indigenous communities who are most impacted by climate change, as we truly believe that there is no climate justice without migrant justice. So what we are hoping now as a Glasgow branch of the UNA Scotland is to create a partnership with the Scottish Refugee Council to just create as much awareness as we can and to help as many people as we can. So with everything that I just said, we are truly trying to take into consideration everything that happened. It did not happen during COP26, and we are using that to use our voices, our knowledge, and our experience to create partnerships so that we could create awareness and create change. So thank you, everyone, and happy Earth Day to all.
Good, thank you so much. And we're going to go into our question and answer period, but I'm going to start the questions off and then I'll hand it over to Hana and Chris. For the speakers, we witnessed the disparity in attention, resources, and assistance given to poor geographic areas that have been affected by climate change. How can we address the inequality in emergency response to natural disasters? Okay, Melinda or Georgia, you want to handle that? Because I see you talked a little bit about that in your area.
I think it's critically important to get back to what we tried to set up at the end of the Iraq War, where we tried to develop a revolving fund that could finance immediately disaster response at the UN. The United States, for about 4 or 5 years, was an active funder of that, along with particularly the European Commission, which is probably the biggest contributor to disaster response. But COVID and the response of the developed world to the pandemic has shown how the whole dynamic of national government finance is shaped, first of all, by what's seen as domestic priority. Secondly, what's seen as near-term security issues. And it's very hard to get to that last level of equity. And both the Secretary General and the head of WHO have spoken to this recently, as well as David Beasley, who's head of World Food Program, who says, well, I'm now getting a lot of money for Ukraine, but I have crises in Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Syria. And I'm not able to adequately address them. So we need a lot more work on the state of environmental and economic justice if we're going to address this.
Okay, thank you so much, Melinda. Joshua, you're addressing this on the part of Indigenous groups, and Rebecca was addressing it in terms of gender violence resulting in climate change. Would either one of you want to respond to that?
I'll go, but I wanted to make sure if she wanted to go first.
Okay, go ahead, Josh.
All right, so I think the big issue, of course, here in the Pacific is the climate crisis is here now. It's not in the future. So we already have people being forced to flee. In Fiji, they've been at least doing a human rights-based approach, and we already have villages moving from the coastline where their ancestors have always lived to more inland. And the government has been working with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to do that human rights-based approach. But we also can see the extremes of what can happen. And I think the first steps, of course, we need to do is get really strong language in COP27 on loss and damages to be able to assist Pacific Island peoples who are being impacted. And then the other side is to know how vulnerable and the fragility of each Pacific Island nation. We saw that with Tonga early in the year with the volcano, and seeing how then it knocked out the entire communication system. So I think what we need to do is make sure that funds are available, but also teams are available in each region based on the skill sets that are required to assist. And I'll say I remember also, because while we're dealing with COVID during the past 2 years, the climate crisis only continued here in the Pacific, and there would be typhoons hitting Pacific Island states. And in one way, the traditional lines of assistance and aid, the boats didn't even arrive. It was actually the vaca and the canoe that I was talking about earlier that were able to leave and be able to bring assistance. So I think by region, as well as organizing with skills, that's one important way that we can go forward to ensure that people are dealing. But we also must provide the framework in these COP negotiations. And I think it's Article 6, loss and damages, the last area we really have to concentrate on. Mahalo.
Great, thanks you, Joshua. I'm going to call in Chris Howard of UNA Scotland to handle the rest of the Q&A section. Chris?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Tita. I think I'll relinquish my question in the interest of time and perhaps open it up to one of the participants to ask a question. And then I can come back in at the end and we can show off one of the products we've been creating, which is a guide for climate action at the grassroots level. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or just start speaking, and we'll go from there. Thanks. Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca, you used the term Reclaim Finance Organization. Can you explain that once again?
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, so they're just, I mean, they're a legal organization, an NGO that do research into sustainable finance, and they've put out a report. I can get the link and put it in the comments if people want to read that. I've read the headlines. I do mean to read it in detail at some point, because it's a breakdown of all the kind of large asset managers and where they're investing and are they fulfilling their you know, their kind of claims and what they've pledged to do. It did name a couple of companies who were kind of demanding certain things of the companies they invest in, and kind of telling them, we want you to do this and we need you to do it by a certain date, and kind of actually having those teeth and trying to drive change. So I'm very interested to read the detail and see who's on the kind of naughty list as well at some point, but I'm not going to name anybody right now. But I think it's good that we're aware of this, because it's very easy for companies on the one hand to say, you know, we care about the environment and we do this and we've got this product and this brochure and we recycle and we all these different things, but then they're doing something else somewhere else which is beyond negating all the good work as well. So I think it's very good that we empower ourselves by making us aware of this information. So I'll just Google the link and then pop it in for it, and then everybody can follow up on that. So.
And then my one quick comment to your remarks, I totally agree that we have to take control and communicate to our financial advisors. You know, I just remember telling my financial advisors to take certain companies out of my portfolio because I did not think they were doing great benefits to climate. So it's, I just totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's very important to open that subject up for discussion, because don't wait for that to be raised by the person at the other side of the table. Raise that yourself and you know, get them to take it seriously. Not everything is possible. You know, you can't always create this perfect portfolio of investments because we don't live in a perfect world. But if you don't ask, if you don't try, you're not going to get, you know. So.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So we're going to quickly show a guide we've been putting together. Basically what we can do as UN civil society at the grassroots level, and also some reflections upon our last event and our kind of reactions to COP26. So I think Josh is going to take us through the guide, and then we'll move into some closing remarks.
Absolutely. So our guide here outlines our previous dialogue session and the outcomes that we actually received after our event as well, outlining the overall opinions and perceptions of COP26, as well as people's overall views on the partnerships in order to tackle the climate action. Moving beyond this, we have subsequently got some initial points here for you to consider after this event and through our ongoing panel discussion, broken down into government actions and community actions, with a focus on those events that have already happened, ranging from consideration of deforestation, the electrification of electric transport, community engagement, community affirmative action, from marches to letter writing to local MPs, as well as now we've also got some suggestive actions as well at the latter part here. So this is ranging from the consideration of individuals to make a conscious effort to account for their own environmental impacts, as well as the education of the upcoming generation, with a focus on sustainable development, as well as focusing on the vegetable and physical actions that we can take in schools. We've also then got the consideration of continued efforts and the continued lobbying of governments, as well as promoting governments to continue investments in just transitions. Just a few brief points here to consider in stimulating our discussion. While we'd ask you to bear these in mind for our potential advocacy and actions, I'll now pass back to our panel here to sort of moderate some more Q&A session.
Great, thanks. Great, thank you. Sorry, I think in the interest of time, we're going to move into some closing remarks. So I think Dorothea and then Tita. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you also to everybody who put the toolkit together. I think it's a really excellent resource, and it's wonderful to see these types of toolkits available. You will have seen it put into the chat box. It's a PDF that you can download. And if you have any other thoughts and ideas for encouragement of collaboration, please do share that. Certainly it is the way of the future for us to reach out to each other across the world to collaborate. This is where we're going to be able to really start to see change happen. And so a huge amount of gratitude to everybody here who attended. Thank you for being here. Thank you also to the organizing committee and to UNA USA to work in collaboration with us here in UNA Scotland. Happy Earth Day, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Dorothea. We want to thank our panelists and thank you, our participants, for this dialogue on this Earth Day. Advocacy and action are needed for us to turn the tide and save our planet. Yes, we know some may say it is already too late. However, we believe that not only is it not too late, but we can make a difference. The Earth Day 2022 theme is Invest in Our Planet. Already there are efforts by global organizations such as the Great Global Cleanup, Sustainable Fashion, Climate and Environmental Literacy, Canopy Project, Food and Environment, and the Global Earth Challenge. These can be found at earthday.org. And I do want to acknowledge University of California, Berkeley, that has a major program going. We didn't have time to hear from them, but maybe afterwards we can share some ideas with them. This is the moment to change it all. The business climate, the political climate, and how we take action on climate. Now is the time for the unstoppable courage to preserve and protect our health, our families, and our livelihoods. For Earth Day 2022, we need to act boldly, innovate broadly, and implement equitably. It's going to take all of us, all in, businesses, governments, and citizens, everyone accounted for and everyone accountable. A partnership for the planet. On the first Earth Day in 1970, as I mentioned, news anchor Walter Cronkite stated, "Today is a day set aside for a global outpouring of mankind seeking its own survival." It has continued for over 50 years. The distant warnings, as Melinda said, are now alarms. Last year, we came together to discuss the goals and challenges identified at COP26. Today, we have come together again as we proceed on the path of survival. In June, the world will gather once again in Sweden for the Stockholm +50 meeting. Our UN Secretary General has already stated, let us make sure our leaders bring the ambition and action needed to address our triple planetary emergency. Because we have only one Mother Earth, we must do everything we can to protect her. In the fall, there will be COP27 in Egypt. And I love Joshua's E4. What progress will have been made? What dangers averted? What actions taken will be assessed? The time is now to create a generation of citizens, workers, students, and leaders taking action on climate change. So where do we go from here? Over a half century ago, Dr. King posed the same question. He stated, we have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together. We must live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Today we say to save the earth and to save ourselves and our future generations, we must work together, nations united or perish. We must choose between action or non-existence. And one of the great Native American chiefs, Seattle, told us centuries ago, quote, "The earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth, befalls the sons of earth." We here today have chosen to work together. We will go forward in actions and in commitments to create a better world. We can do this. Remember Margaret Mead's words, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So on this Earth Day, we thank you for your action today and let us go forth together. Yeah, I'll now turn it back over to Chris and Hana for our closeout portion.
Great, thank you so much, Tita and Dorothea. That's the official end of the event, but we're going to keep the Zoom open for some networking. So in spirit of collaboration, feel free to, I guess, ask any of the panelists questions if they're going to be staying around, and just to have a chat with each other, especially from different UNAs. I think that'd be really useful.